I kind of just want to ramble at you because, so, like a year ago, I made a video about Wiccans cursing, and I made that video because I was feeling shitty because my air conditioner had just died, and my house was 90 degrees, and it's fucking July, and anyway, here I am a year later, and I spent a bajillion dollars on a whole new air conditioning unit, and it has died on its birthday. And anyway, Ralph, the HVAC guy, is in my backyard right now examining the unit. Apparently, my compressor has just gone, right? And I ask questions like, well, what happened? And he says valuable things such as, well, everything has a failure rate. Yes, it does. That's true. So my compressor is dead, and the compressor, for those of you who didn't Google it on the internet 10 minutes ago, the compressor is basically like the central, like, expensive, important part of the air conditioner, and when it dies, it's often not cost effective to replace. Often it just makes more sense to install a new unit. So I'm very sad at this news. This is my second cup of coffee. My house is 90 degrees. And Oliver is just languishing in the hall upstairs. It's actually really cute. If it weren't 90 degrees, he's just sprawled, right? Like some kind of, I don't know, like some kind of prince in like a Rudyard Kipling novel or something. So I wanted to complain to somebody, so I'm complaining to you. Thank you. I'm sitting here reading. I'm reading Things Fall Apart for the first time. Do you guys know this book? Right? So this is apparently one of those classic pieces of literature that I just never encountered throughout my education, and I suspect that this is just one of those examples of it not falling within the white dude canon, so it just doesn't get included. Usually, I think a lot of just American English majors and just, English high school students and that sort of thing around the States. You'll read like A Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes, and maybe you'll read some Toni Morrison if it hasn't been like banned in your district or something. But that's really the full, and there might be some Zora Neale Hurston, right? But generally speaking, like everything else is white dude canon. And anyway, this is a nice change of pace from what I've been doing the last few weeks. Like I said in the last video, I'm trying to plug in holes in my literary education in preparation, probably in over preparation for my praxis exam, my English content exam. And just generally, like, just as part of good practice, like I feel like if I'm going to be teaching, if I'm going to be like loosed at a high school with students who I care about, then I should have a background in what I purport to be teaching. So, anyway, everything I've read so far has been, I've just been like going down lists, right? Like 100 most famous books and things that all high schoolers should read and that kind of stuff. And there's an awful lot of like World War II stuff. Pretty much everything is white dude material. And the moral of all of the stories is life is hard and horrible and everybody dies horribly. And anyway, so it's been, like as a reader, it's been a rough couple of weeks over here. So anyway, at least things are going horribly wrong on a different continent now. But that's what I'm doing. I'm going to Asheville later. I told you, I'm sorry, I'm like rubbing my head because it's fucking hot, and also my glasses give me a headache. There's something about the way they touch my head that just, like, the prescription is fine. But anyway, that's what's going on. I'm hot and my head hurts. And I drank all of the vodka last night, and it's not even noon, so that's not socially acceptable right now. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna make more coffee after this. So I'm going to Asheville later to train with their sword group. I'm really pumped about it. Like I said in my last video, I was there on Sunday, and it was supposed to be a field trip, with the Charlotte group, but that kind of fell through, so I ended up going by myself and just meeting up with one other guy in my club. But we had an awesome time, and I figure, you know, teaching schedule, I've got the time off. I'm going to take advantage of that while I can, so I'm driving back to Asheville to take another class. I'm super pumped about it. I blogged about the sword stuff, some of the sword stuff, yesterday on Pathos. But I don't know. I've been thinking about it a lot lately because it's taken on this devotional quality that I wanted to talk about a little bit. Just because it's not something that I can necessarily articulate really well at this point either, and I think putting it on the internet and potentially being embarrassed about it down the road is that's how I process. So I told you guys a few years ago in a video about runes that I kind of have this, I don't know, I kind of have this relationship with certain parts of like Norse traditions and heathenry, just as part of the work I've done reading runes. Like when I got my first rune set, it was purely just a question of being curious, right? Like you read all of those 101 books and they're like, oh, you should try a bunch of different divination methods, and like here's your list of gods, right? It was one of those kinds of situations. And I was at a festival several years ago, and there was a workshop on runes and making your own runes. And, like, that was just kind of fun, and, like, haha, I didn't think very much of it. Like, this is neat, I can add this to my witchy repertoire or whatever. And I actually started working with it over time, and it turns out that there's this, right, like, well, imagine, there's this, like, really intense religious component that gets left out of these, like, Wicca 101 books, right? So I found myself in conversation with, I don't know how else to put this. Like, in conversation with Norse deities and then practitioners of Norse traditions when I was calling them up and being like, what the fuck is happening here? So my free spirit friends, the joke is that I'm heathen adjacent, right? Like, I'm their token Wiccan. Okay, like honestly, most of my pagan friends are some stripe of heathen or Norse traditionalists. And anyway, because that's where I'm hanging out at festivals, these are the people who I made friends with first. That's the environment in which I'm moving during the summer. And often in more public kind of neo-pagan spaces, I tend to gravitate towards this particular kind of praxis. I think it's because, part of it is because, like, I'm a Wiccan, okay, like, this isn't a question. But as a Gardnerian Wiccan, I'm kind of still in this isolated sort of position, even amongst other Wiccans, right? You know, for a variety of reasons, but part of it is, like, as a Gardnerian, you can't just walk into other open Wiccan spaces and just be, like, completely open with people, because you're still practicing a closed form of oath-bound Wicca, right? Like, you're still, even amongst broader Gardnerian communities, you're not necessarily just, like, spewing your guts everywhere, because the whole point is that you're building this individual praxis with your gods within the context of your coven and your family, right? And how big that community is really depends on you and where you're located. But I can't just go to, like, Pagan Night Out down the road and be BFFs with all of the other Wiccans instantly, because the reality is that we're still up to different things, okay? And that's totally cool. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just making the point that sometimes, like, as a Wiccan, you can move in Wiccan spaces and still find that you have more in common with other kinds of pagans. I've especially found that to be true as a Wiccan polytheist. Like, I don't really understand why people are so mystified by the idea that a Wiccan can be a polytheist. It was actually news to me that we weren't, right? So, I mean, the whole... never mind. But, like, there's... Like, people believe how they want to believe, that, like, Wicca isn't out there necessarily dictating the kind of relationship that you have with gods. But I'm a polytheist, and I've been a polytheist for a really, really long time. So the idea that there are other gods out there with whom I may or may not interact, who have other things to say to their own practitioners that have nothing to do with Wicca, that's not a problem for me, okay? So moving in heathen spaces, in a lot of ways, it felt really natural. And personally, the kinds of ideals and practices that go on in these spaces are things that have fallen in line with just, I think, who I am, just kind of as a person. I think being from a military family, living in the South, like there are just certain parts about how I live that jive really well with the personalities of many of the kindreds that I've come into contact with. Okay. So all that to say, there's this other part of my life where I'm not heathen, but I might be heathen adjacent. Okay. My heathen friends find this hilarious. I'm the token Wiccan, right? And it's funny because I think there is this kind of attitude in particularly heathen spaces, and like there's lots of good reasons for these things, okay? But there's this particular attitude that like these traditions are just inherently kind of incompatible and can't even be friends, right? And like everybody just collectively cringes when people start talking about Norse Wicca or Wicca True or whatever. Like I don't even fucking know, okay? So what ends up happening is that I move in these heathen spaces and people end up being surprised that I'm Wiccan because they expect Wiccans to be assholes or something, okay? And I don't know. Okay, so long story. I didn't give you the short version. In working with the runes and in hanging out in these particular communities, I've built a particular kind of relationship with these gods, okay, one in particular. And the sword training has become a devotional act in that context. And it's been, I don't know, it's been really great. It's a reciprocal thing, right? Like I do, I honor the god in particular ways every week, and then I don't know, I feel like I have this, that translates into a more committed kind of performance when I'm practicing with my sword. So it's become really important, and I'm looking forward to seeing like how far I go with it. It's been really good for me. The blog that I wrote on Patheos is about how it's also altered my relationship with my ritual sword and just blades in general. Like blades are really important in Wicca. I think, you know, even like maybe no matter what kind you practice. I know there are Wiccans out there who don't necessarily use athames, but like most of us do. The idea that there are ritual blades, and there are several ritual blades in Wicca, right? Jason Mankey just wrote a whole book about the athame, and that touched on other kinds of knives used in Wicca too. And anyway, I think having that additional element where I'm approaching the sword not simply as this, you know, representation of a kind of authority and circle, or, you know, these elemental associations, or, you know, this idea that the blade is there for directing energy or whatever, like, there's also this component of the fact that the blade is a weapon, right? So learning to use it as a weapon has altered how I handle it and how I think about it. And I found that it's been really interesting. It's added a level of depth to my practice recently that's been really welcome. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of ramble at you guys about that. But it's 90 degrees in my house. I'm going to make more hot coffee because that's what one does when it's 90 degrees. I'll probably just go sit outside because I think it's actually cooler.